Yeah. Okay, so the first lighting setup that we are going to introduce you to is this neutral diffuse lighting setup.
Yeah, neutral diffuse light is basically what light looks like on an overcast day. Overall, the color of the light is white, so that's neutral. And it's diffused because the sun is filtering the light through the clouds. So we're going to start there for a number of reasons, a lot of which we're not going to get into right away. We're going to ask you to trust us a little bit. This is the place for us to start so that we can build upon it later. So future lessons, it'll become a lot clearer why we started here.
Yeah, in the traditional painting classes, you normally start with a direct light, like a spotlight, because it's easier to see light and shadow, and cast shadows, crest, and all that stuff. But we are going to start with diffuse lighting, which makes it a little bit harder at first, but you'll understand later that why we're stressing to learn diffuse lighting setup first.
So the first thing is identifying diffuse neutral light. There are three basic principles that we've broken it down to, and they're not even necessarily principles, but they're just three things to look for. One is soft cast shadows, the other is contact shadows, and the last is kind of local color showing up. And we'll talk about why these things happen and how they show up. So this ball overall is lit kind of in this neutral diffused light. If it was lit by a spotlight, it might look something like this. So this is what we might be more used to seeing in kind of an academic studio where we might be painting from the figure. And what's happening here is we have direct light, right? Basically, light is coming from one direction, hitting this object and hitting the white floor. So it creates a hardened cast shadow, really hard-edged cast shadow. It also creates a highlight. So light is all coming from one direction in this instance, and where light isn't is very clear, very delineated for us, because that's what a shadow is. It's where the light is not. It's kind of the absence of light. So the object is blocking the light, which is coming from this only one direction. So what causes these soft cast shadows? So if in a direct light setup, we saw the direction the light's coming from. In a diffuse light setup, light is actually coming from all sorts of directions. And it could be a number of reasons why, whether it's filtered by clouds, or you might be shining light through a scrim or a sheet. Anything that's kind of like diffusing the light like this is actually causing the light to come from many different directions. And that's actually what creates this kind of softened shadow. Right? And related to kind of shadows, shadows really are kind of the absence of light. So contact shadows are an important element as part of the cast shadow, which is where two objects are meeting. It's difficult for the light, even though it's coming from all sorts of directions, to get into the crevices where two objects are meeting, two surfaces are meeting. So that creates actually kind of the darkest area usually is the contact shadow, where two surfaces are meeting.
We often kind of, when we are painting under overcast, a lot of us have this tendency to lose this contrast, especially we don't paint the darks because it doesn't seem obvious. And the reason why it doesn't seem obvious is that it has a soft edges that you don't, when it's a cast shadow with a very hard edge, clearly you see where the shadow is. But when it's so soft, it doesn't seem, the contrast isn't there. But in fact, it does get really dark.
So the last kind of rule or observation we wanted to make about identifying diffuse neutral light is the local color will often show up. And this is a little bit tricky in this example because we have a white object, a white light, and a white surface. So everything is white, and that's why everything looks the way it does. So this white light, if we change the color of the light in this setup, a red light might look something like this, where all the color is coming from the color of the light. But having a white light means that the local color will show up. So a lot of people, I think especially because a diffuse neutral light setup is similar to like overcast lighting, on an overcast lighting day, a lot of people paint gray. but that's actually not totally true. You should be seeing quite a bit of color, and it should be the local color that's showing up of an object rather than having the influence of colored light. So if we change the object to have a pattern in color or something like this, this is actually what you should see in a setup like this. And so no matter what the object is, you're kind of seeing the local color of that object is what's going to be giving you the color rather than the color of the light. To kind of sum it up, there are three things we really want you to pay attention to. Soft cast shadows, dark contact shadows, and the local color of objects giving you your color. So let's look at a real-life example of this. This is our pig skull photographed in our studio. And this is an overcast kind of light setup. This is a diffuse neutral light setup. You'll see here kind of some of the three things we're talking about: the softened shadows, the contact shadows, and the local color. Now, under a direct light setup, it might look something like this, right? And this is, as you can see, it's a lot more graphic in a way. You can clearly see where the shadow is. You can see how dark things get. But again, in an overcast or diffuse neutral light setup, you'll see that right under the pig, under his belly, you see how dark it gets and how it softens out. Right under his snout, you can also see how dark it gets. Those are darkened contact shadows. Also, one thing that we should talk about is the fact that this lighting, even though it's not all coming from one direction, lighting will still have a direction. So if you look at this pig, it's not like the light is coming from every single direction. The light is spread all throughout, but overall there is a direction coming kind of from top and behind down.
So this is one of the paintings I did on Monsters University, and a lot of the sets we painted under overcast lighting so that we can show the local colors to our shading department, and also get the basic feeling of how the set would look like under the neutral white lighting. And we'll show you later how we can light it differently on top of this. But having this overcast lighting paintings done for every set makes it very helpful for later.
You could see kind of, one soft shadows. Actually, at this distance, you actually don't see many cast shadows, right? Because you're pretty far away. But if you look at the building, actually, you do see this kind of planes. You see a bit of kind of cast shadows in certain areas that are really softened out, kind of they almost look like gradients almost. And then you can see where two surfaces meet. So like in the corners of a building, like where two parts of the architecture meet, Dice is kind of darkened in there. That's what we were talking about, the contact shadow. And then of course, like Dice was saying, you see local color in these examples. So like grass is green and the house is yellow. And stepping back from the exercise of just looking at diffuse neutral light, what's great is that in production we use this, and these are helpful paintings for making 3D feature films, because you get an overall sense of the set, and you get to look at the local colors of things, and you get to kind of get the overall feel of the set, but looking at it through a neutral light. So that's kind of the production purpose for some of these paintings, but they're great examples of the diffuse neutral light setup. Let's look at an interior really quick. So an interior is a little bit different because the light is still coming from the window. So this is what we were talking about as far as having a direction to the light. So the light's not necessarily coming from above. It's actually coming from the window, and it's diffusing from outside and coming in. This diffuse light is coming in through the window. So you can actually start to see planes here. You can see a dark side facing the camera versus surfaces that are facing towards the light. But still, you see those same ideas. So by the luggage, you can see in the lower right screen, you can see it gets pretty dark where those objects contact the floor. And those are those dark contact shadows. So let's look at another interior example. This is kind of, this is a diagrammatic painting that's kind of a cross-section of some of the sewers that we were in. But those same principles apply. We have a single light source up above. That's actually a hole in the top of the dome. and the light is pouring in, and again, we're kind of darkening back in the shadows because that's where light is not getting. So some of these tunnels are going pretty dark because of that, and the top surfaces is the brightest surface that we're seeing.
So another example that from Toy Story 3, basically imagine the room has no lights on, only the ambient light from outside coming in, but no direct light. It's all ambient sort of diffuse light. So soft, somewhat neutral light is pouring in, but still has a direction. In this case, the room has two windows, so it has a direction, but not from one single light source.
Yeah, and actually, if you look outside, right, that's actually being lit by direct light, it looks like. So outside the window is being lit by direct light, but because that light is not pouring into this room from that direct light source, it's actually diffuse light that's coming in.
Yep.
So let's look at some of the masters. Let's look at this John Singer Sargent painting. This is the same light setup. This is a neutral light setup that's diffused. You can see those same principles showing up here, kind of darkened contact shadows, soft cast shadows, and local color showing up. And it's a beautiful painting, but it's great because you compositionally, obviously using white on white and different temperatures of white, and really using color accents that are coming out from the local color of the objects rather than the color of the light.
Yeah, this room, indoor painting, obviously by Sargent again, is this, another example of diffuse neutral light, yet having that direction. And if you look at this girl on the left, this is what I'm talking about. Like this contact shadow, it gets really dark, but quickly it diffuses out because the light is wrapping around to diffuse the cast shadow. So you still get the sense of cast shadow, very soft in this direction, but then you really only see her shadow more around the contacts. It's a beautiful painting.
Yeah, and also you can see here, there's a highlight, and that's a reflection. The reflection of the light source, right? So don't get too confused. It's the material properties of that vase that is a reflective surface, and in that surface, it's reflecting the light source, right? So all highlights are a reflection of the light source.